The big racing days just keep rolling on. Now it's time to shift our focus on over to Aqueduct. And remember, like always, when you're playing the races, you want to get to drf.com. And for Aqueduct, past performances, DRF picks, everything you need to succeed for the races over in New York. And when we're talking about races in New York, who better to join me than one of my good friends, man who's done some fantastic work for NYRA Bets. And not only does he do great stuff for New York, but since he does work for NYRA Bets, he's always giving you best bets for all sorts of different tracks. He's handicapping big races all across the country and all across the world. Talking about the professor. Where's the whiteboard? Matt DeSantis. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for that great intro. I'm getting hyped myself. I was like, man, who's on this show with Gino? This guy sounds great.
Sounds great.
But,
Looks great. Yeah. Looks great when we don't
uh,
see you, especially right when we're not seeing either one of
yeah,
us. That's when you and I look our best when we're doing the audio
exactly.
versions. So,
Like they say,
um,
you got a face for radio. So, it's no, things are good, man. Things are great up here in New York. Obviously, doing a lot with Naira bets and all of the different, tracks, like you said, covering it from coast to coast. And obviously, a huge weekend out in your neck of the woods with the Santa Anita Derby, and also obviously opening weekend at Keeneland. And obviously, we have a great card up here on Saturday for the Wood Memorial with 5 overall stakes races, 4 graded stakes races, and just really fun set of racing on Saturday.
now a few days out, you and I are recording this on Thursday. What are we looking like for the weather?
So it is actually really nice now. We've had anybody who's been following East Coast racing knows we've just had a deluge of rain, really, for the
Unlucky.
last
So
uh,
for such a long
ye-
time now.
Yeah, and we've just had so much rain, particularly earlier this week. I mean, Parks canceled their card 3 races into it yesterday, but it cleared this morning. It's sunny out now. It's going to remain. It'll be cloudy probably on Saturday, but there's no rain in the forecast from Thursday morning through Saturday. So by the time racing starts on Saturday, I would expect a fast track. The track's already been upgraded today to good. And if it's already at good today, it's going to be fast by Saturday.
As we get started, I just want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up. Matt, as a good friend, was able to wait a few minutes for me. I had to call an audible because I had a power outage at my normal little setup where I am. So where I'm actually very lucky is that I have an opportunity to roll down to mom and dad's house. What happens when something goes wrong? You call mom and dad. Even when you're 37 years old, it doesn't change. You're always going to do that. So that's
It
what I
never
do.
changes.
Nope. I roll right down here. I'm sitting set up in my childhood bedroom where I slept all my life as a kid. So if the audio is a little bit off or maybe the connection's not quite as strong, apologies. But thanks too for Matt for holding strong with me a few extra minutes. And Matt, what I do appreciate, the Aqueduct did this weekend. Santa Anita did this too. Sometimes when you schedule a card, the stakes races and the graded stakes races are the best wagering races. They're really deep fields. They're good betting opportunities. Other times they're not. And if they're not, you don't have to force them all necessarily into the same sequence. If you have other good races on the card and you want to spread them out and give your bettors the best gambling sequences, they did that at Santa Anita and they did that at Aqueduct. They've been trying to do that with the coast to coast pick 5 sequences too, where they're not necessarily as quick, but they're picking out the best races throughout the day. And as a gambler, I can understand why they're doing that because it just gives us more horses in a pick 4 or a more intriguing pick 4 or pick 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the specific instance here, Aqueduct this Saturday is the Carter, which we'll talk about, is a 5-horse race, and it's earlier in the card. And listen, you look at that late pick 5 that we have on Saturday, starting with the 7th race. It's an 11-horse allowance race, and it closes out with a 10-horse maiden special weight race. And in between, you have your 3 stakes races of the Gazelle, the Bayshore, and the Wood Memorial. But as a bettor, you want full field races, and you want races that are a little bit more difficult where you can catch a price, and you're going to be able to catch a much bigger price in an 11-horse allowance race than you will in a 5-horse stakes race. So
where 3 of the horses are going to be 5-2 and below, right, in this particular field that we're going to look at with the Carter. And there's also other ways you can play this race. There's a mandatory pay pick 5 that starts and goes in like the middle part of the sequence that will encompass a couple of these stakes races if you want to do that too. So many wagering opportunities. There's also that big pick 3 this weekend that debuts with the 3 big Kentucky Derby prep races. Because remember, folks, this is really the last weekend. You have 3 big Kentucky Derby prep races, and then you have the Lexington left, which has a small amount of points for some horses that may just need a few extra. But the points cutoff this year is probably going to be higher than we've ever seen, because we, fingers crossed, so far, we haven't seen as much, Matt, of horses having to get injured and miss races and miss, like necessarily declare themselves off the Derby trail so far. And that'll happen in the next month now after everything settles. But so far, it's nice when they don't have to do it because of injury. They can do it because of choice and choosing to go shorter or in a different route.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also speaks to the fact we've not seen a domination within any of these circuits by one horse, which sometimes happens, where one horse sweeps all the Florida preps, one horse sweeps all the fairground preps or Oaklawn preps. We've not seen that. Everybody's taking turns winning, finishing second, finishing third. Therefore, you just have these 20, 30 horses that have all accumulated a decent amount of points that have all run respectably. Yeah, and so it just makes it tough. I mean, the connections are obviously going to want to take a shot at getting to the Kentucky Derby. And like you said, there's not been, fortunately, a lot of injuries or horses being taken off the trail this year. So, yeah, the point total is going to be rather high. So some horse may end up wanting to run in that Lexington just to get an extra 10 points or 20 points to secure their spot in the top 20 and not really the top 18, because you already know a horse like Forever Young and T.O. Passwords, another Japanese horse, are both coming over. So really the American horses are fighting for the top 18 spots.
We're going to talk about the Wood Memorial in just a bit, but what we'll do here is we'll bounce around. We'll discuss all 5 of the stakes races to help you out however you plan on playing the races on Saturday at Aqueduct, with so many different ways you can get involved. So the 4th race is the Grade 2 Carter, just a small field, but a couple real quality horses in here, Matt, and horses that you and I have talked about recently when we, at one point we're trying to beat Super Chow. He used to be a horse that didn't really want to go beyond 6 and had never really shown that he can sit off the pace. He was kind of one-dimensional 6 furlong horse, and he's grown up a little bit and matured, and he can get more distance and he can sit off a little if he has to, if the circumstances, determine that. He's a major player in here, and with his running style, a lot of times you just kind of have to start with him because he is usually the major X factor in races with that, major speed. Right next door to him, you have Post Time, who has done almost nothing wrong. His only defeat in 8 starts came in a stakes race at Keeneland behind Raise Kane and Dr. Venkman, who are 2 nice horses. And then on the outside, you have the Grade 3 winner, Petulante, who's another that's done so little wrong. He's never been worse than 3rd. He's never been beaten more than a length and 3/4 in any race. And he totally looks like a horse who needed his last race and could take a step forward second off the long layoff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are the 3 you really have to isolate in this field. And, from a pace standpoint, Super Chow is a horse that should get a similar trip to what he got in the Toboggan, when neither of us thought he would be able to get that 7 furlongs, but he got out on a pretty easy lead and was able to get brave and get confident and really pull away and lengthen out over Maniwa that day, finishing 4.25 lengths ahead over a sloppy track. I do wonder, Matty Oliver did a great job riding this horse last couple of times and, winning a couple of Grade 3s. There's not a lot of other pace in this race. So Super Chow is going to be up front. I would expect for Joel Rosario to be very close to him, though, with Petulante. I do not expect him to let this horse get away quite the way that he got away in that Toboggan. So I really like Petulante in the spot at 2-1 on the morning line. Your second choice to Post Time. I think like you said, that horse absolutely needed one off the bench. It had been a 9-month layoff, comes back, still runs 3rd in the Stymie behind a couple of nice horses in Kinetic Sky and Quality Chic, both very, respectable horses. and now is going to get back on a dry, fast track. Miserable conditions that day too, on March 2nd.
So you have so think about that. Then you have multiple excuses, right? Because he's coming off the long layoff, and he hooks this sloppy track that was really, really poor when you watch the races back in the conditions. And we were watching these races that day, but when you go back and watch again, you're like, wow, there were probably a lot of horses that may not have liked those conditions at all. And despite the layoff, he still ran a bang-up race that was right in the mix with races he was running, 8-9 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we obviously know he can handle the distance as he's a winner of the Salvatore Mile. So going a little bit longer is no problem. So that's why I think Joel's going to feel comfortable using a little bit of early speed with this horse, knowing that now second back with Rick Dutro Jr.'s barn, this is going to be a horse that's going to have plenty left at the end. I just don't think, you go back and look at those splits in the toboggan, I just don't think Super Chow is going to be able to set things quite so slow up front. And I mean, this is a horse that had a 2-length lead at second call. I just don't see that being the case. And if it is, then lights out. Then Super Chow is probably going to do the same thing again. But the horse we shouldn't short shift, obviously, is Post Time for Brittany Russell, a horse that's come off, consecutive triple-digit buyer speed figure races and is 4 for 5 winning at 7 furlongs. My only question is, this horse really likes to come from off the pace, and we just talked about how there might not be a lot of pace. So this is one maybe you want to play against a heavy favorite here with a horse like Petulante.
I think I have him stacked the exact same way it sounds like you do with Petulante, the horse that we just expect to take such a nice step forward, second start off the bench. Even in watching that race back, so he has a fine start. He's actually on the lead from the outside, and then they want to sit, so they don't really get aggressive with him. He's sitting like 3 or 4 in the 3 or 4 path out wide. He's never more than a length and a half off. He moves up to challenge, but at that point, you could tell he was all in early, and you're watching the race going, this horse is tired. He's going to start backing up. But he keeps trying. Even when he looked like he was done, off a layoff on a track he obviously didn't like, he kept grinding and grinding. To me, that's just class. That just shows this horse is a nice animal who doesn't want to get beat, and I think this is a really good spot for him. And as you pointed out, Joel does get typecast a lot of time as the deep closer guy, and I think it's a fair typecasting, right? It's very fair. It's like Hemsworth beefed up for Thor. Like, you got to put him in the Hulk Hogan biopic. You know what I mean? So I get what, because Joel's a strong closer. I mention it a lot of times. He reminds me of a shortstop with a fantastic arm that'll sometimes, like, they know they can make any throw, and they'll wait, and then they'll zing it across, and you're like, whoa, look at that guy. He can do that with when he closes. But I think people sometimes forget that he was out here in Southern California for a while, where you have to be on speed and you have to be really aggressive just in order to keep up and to be able to ride on those good horses. It's not that he can't do it. It's just that he doesn't maybe enough, because when he is on the lead with the horse, I think I like it quite a bit. I'm like, this horse is in great shape.
Yeah, he is incredibly dangerous when he's on the lead. He's a great rider on the lead. He's got a good internal clock. He understands, when to press the button on those horses on the lead and when to try to scoot and get away. He's very good. Really, where Joel gets into trouble is, I think, it's not that he takes back on speed horses a lot. He will occasionally, but rarely. What happens is, I think a lot of times, he's too deep on the closers, and sometimes he tries to take a mid-pack horse back, maybe too far. And you go, that horse should be 3 lengths off the pace, not 6 lengths off the pace. Tricks gets a little too cute. But when you put him on a speed horse, he generally goes right to the front or kind of gets very close to the lead. So I like him on a speed horse. And that's why I think he'll give a really nice ride to Petulante here.
Yep, I think so too. And Petulante, of these 3 short prices, just feels the one that could stalk, get the trip, drawn well to the outside so he can let Super Chow go a little bit, and then he can figure out how fast do I have to go to just keep this horse honest. You're going to be cutting back, so you're second off the bench. You can go a little bit faster because you feel like you'll be a little fitter. It does just seem like it sets up well for him. The inside two horses, it's not like you can really knock what Whittington Park's done recently, or Castle Chaos, who you can very easily just draw a line through that last race on the sloppy track and forgive him. But I think kind of similar to what we were saying with post time, just running style, right? Race shape. It doesn't seem like it's going to shape up all that well for them on paper.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for them to be in. They like to come from off the pace. Obviously Castle Chaos, a horse that finished third in the Cigar Mile, behind Hoist the Golden Senior Buscador 3 back, and even ran really good in that Fred Hooper behind Tumbarumba. So those are two good races, and you're right. You draw a line through the stymie, and suddenly that horse's form looks just as good as anybody else's in the field. But you do wonder if they're a little against the track, and just a little against the pace scenario in this particular race. But they're horses that, if one of those big three doesn't fire, a horse like Castle Chaos, I would absolutely be using in my trifectas and my kind of exotic wagers, because
he's not
I think that's
completely overmatched. No, not at all. Not at all. And that's why they're at least worth mentioning, the horses that are in sharp form right now in this short field. But you can see by the betting, by the morning line odds, I mean, nobody's a crazy long shot or seems like they're hopeless in this race at all. The first of 5 stakes races on the Saturday card is the Grade 2 Carter. Let's bounce on over to race number 6, which is the next stakes race. This one is the Grade 3 Distaff. So to set this one up, we have fillies and mares 4-year-olds and up. They'll be going 7 furlongs. Towards the outside, you have the very sharp Hot Fudge, who has won 5 in a row now, is an 8-time winner. And is a horse who's been pretty versatile too. When you just look at the running style most recently, when they go a little longer towards a mile, she'll be more forwardly placed. When they cut back a little shorter to 6 furlongs around there, it looks like she can sit off and close from a little farther back, and she can win, on off tracks or fast tracks. So certainly the horse to beat, the one they'll all have to hold off. And you have a horse like Fingal's Cave, Matt, who has done very little wrong in her career. She's just had a tough time recently staying on the track. She had a 14-month layoff followed by another 3-month layoff, which you never like to see after a long layoff, running one race and then another layoff. And it's crazy because she ran a good race when she came back, and she wins a stakes by 4 in the mud, but that causes her to go to the bench again for a little while. So while they are the top contenders, a horse like Fingal's Cave, has ability, but when you're 5 and you've only run 6 times, sometimes you've been your own worst enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's really too bad, because you're right. That horse came back, ran a huge race in the Bay Ridge, and looked so good beating a horse like Venti Valentine that a lot of people who follow New York racing should know plenty about. And, this is a horse that, has, like you said, never really done anything wrong. Only time this horse ever lost was to Wicked Halo in the Raven Run at Keeneland back in 2022. And her biggest issue is just availability. But she is one who, you don't like to see the layoff followed by another layoff. It is good to see that she returned to the track training in mid-February. And so she's been training at least pretty regularly for the last month and a half. So that's been good to see. So she really was only gone for maybe about a month
6 weeks
after that. Yeah, after that last race. So it wasn't like it was a huge layoff. And I have a feeling this was one where David Donk really did want to target this particular race and get her back into that form. And listen, at her best, if she could take a step forward from that Bay Ridge, then I think she's right there. Very good early speed, but is also a little bit tactical, has shown the ability to sit off the pace and be able to win. But Hot Fudge, man, this is a horse that just likes to win. And is, and wins close too. I mean, wins by a nose, wins by a neck, but manages to always get the head down, always gets the W, has shown the last 3 times out, has been able to run without the assistance of Lasix, which I think was a little bit of a question before that, but has really stepped up and, faced better and better competition those last 3 races and been very, very consistent from a speed figure standpoint. And, obviously you look at a horse like Ain't Broke, another Linda Rice horse who, just has not quite measured up to Hot Fudge in recent
Yep.
starts, and it looks to be more of that high level allowance type of horse to get the job done there. But
And for Hot Fudge too, what's a bummer? I mean, if you're someone who wants to play against favorites like this, 7 furlongs is her best distance. Because
right.
her range is from about 6 to a mile. And 7 is the one that hits her right between the eyes. So you're like, oh, this is where she can really just sit tactically. She doesn't have to be on the lead, but she doesn't have to be coming from way out of it. And she is going to be really tough to beat in here.
Yeah, she is. And I would love, it's funny. I would love for Fingal's Cave to have had a race between that last effort and this one, because that's kind of naturally where I would want to gravitate to try to beat Hot Fudge. But it's going to be hard to beat her because, again, this is a little bit like the other race where a lot of these other horses like to come from off the pace. This is only a 6-horse field. And, without a lot of other speed, I mean, maybe a horse like Royal Poppy for Ray Handel presses a little bit.
That's the horse who I was just going to talk to you about. Because if you're playing this race looking for value, this is the horse to me in here, Royal Poppy, who – you start diving into this horse's form overall. She's been in the money in 10 of her 13 career starts. The 3 times she didn't hit the board, career debut, race before a layoff, race before a layoff. So all 3 of those races, you could make legitimate excuses for why she didn't run as well. Oh, she runs poorly in the debut, doesn't run well in February, and then she's gone for 4 months. She doesn't run well in June, and she's gone for a few more months. Everything else is good. And she actually has a race that's a pretty good race. Kind of looks like an outlier, but what I like is that at least I know there's a level that she can hit that is competitive with Hot Fudge. That race she ran when she wins the allowance at Belmont and Aqueduct in the slop that day. Maybe it was the slop that carried her a little bit and inflated the figure. But when you look at her other races, it's not as if she's been a bad horse on the dirt, where the fast, where she's been in her last 3 starts. I did like her most recent effort because she was fastest. She was in the 2 path. She was in between horses. She moved up to second just off the leader. She put that one away and she opened up and she held off 2 challenges. So she may not be a graded stakes type horse, but she's a strong allowance horse who could get a pretty good trip in here. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in this sort of a small field, where I know she has at least the ability to step up under the right circumstances. She might get those circumstances today where I'm hoping that she can get in front of Hot Fudge. Let's just hope that Joelle on Saturday morning is like, hey, aggressive Joelle, let's get you back here. Let's remember those days out on the West Coast when you were riding horses for Baffert and you got a shotgun to the front, and let's hope that we can get him forwardly placed a couple times throughout the day on Saturday.
Absolutely. No, I think that the trip is going to be so key here, because if Royal Poppy can get up front or even sit second to Fingal's Cave.
Because she can pass horses, right? We've seen that she can pass too.
Absolutely. No, she doesn't need to be on the lead, but she can pass horses. And, as long as she's forward, she's going to put herself in a position to at least pick up some pieces. So this is another race where even if you go, well, man, Hot Fudge or Fingal's Cave is really hard to get by, I would use Royal Poppy in an exacta or a trifecta at 10-1, because that's where you're absolutely right. That's where the value is in this particular race, because, a horse that we haven't mentioned is Sheeta Booty, who is coming back for Chad Brown, who ran in last year's Gazelle, who won last year's Busher, and who is coming back at 7 furlongs in the spot. And just on the sheer fact that this is a Chad Brown horse, that horse is going to attract some money.
Absolutely.
And so a horse like Royal Poppy feels like the one that's going to get lost on the board out of all of these horses. And you could end up getting a really nice exacta or try with, maybe a chalky horse up top and then Royal Poppy right underneath, because you put this horse in a position. Dirt sprints at Aqueduct have always been playing to speed. You don't really see horses coming from off the pace that much. I think only 12% of winners have closed from more than 3 lengths off the pace since the beginning of the Aqueduct fall meet this year. So you want to be forward, and that's exactly where Joelle is going to have Royal Poppy.
Yeah, for a horse that's a price, she just checks a lot of boxes. She has speed. She can sit. So there's some versatility to her. She always shows up and gives a good account of herself. And she has legitimate excuses when she doesn't. She's run well over this track. She's run well at this trip. So those are the things I'm looking for when I'm playing price horses. And she checks a lot of those boxes. Royal Poppy, 10-1 on the morning line as we finish up with the grade 3 distaff here. No doubt the horse to beat. Hot Fudge. Be interesting to see if Fingal's Cave kind of had this as a plan all along. As Matt pointed out, you could see a world where they come back. They want to give this horse a race off the bench. Give him a month to give her a month to 6 weeks, and then you can get her ramped back up again for this next one. So certainly has some ability there. Not the biggest fields in the first 2 stakes races we talked about, but very intriguing with some quality horses in there and maybe some price horses you could toss in the mix. Let's move to the next trio of stakes races, Matt. That'll be races 8, 9, and 10. And race number 8 is the grade 3 Gazelle, where we actually have a maiden who was scratched from the fantasy last week. Where's My Ring? She's been twice beaten by a very nice filly named Kinza, who's going to be running in the Santa Anita Oaks out here at Santa Anita this weekend. And Where's My Ring? While she's not won, she's a graded stakes placed and a very talented filly. She's going to be one of the major players in this Gazelle. Taking a look through the rest of the field, we'll have to ask the question with Life Talk, what happened last time out at Tampa Bay Downs in the Suncoast? Because I can very easily say, yep, she didn't like the track, or, maybe she needed the race, or whatever it was. But my counter to that would be, she'd never run a bad race in her life at 3 different tracks on sloppy and fast tracks prior to that, including a race against the Breeders' in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies against the best fillies there were. She'd never been bad. And when it happens at the beginning of your 3-year-old season, after the 2-year-old season, it always puts a red flag up for me, where you really don't know, right? Was it the track? It wasn't really the trip, Matt. She was kind of in the second flight. It wasn't some awful trip. I mean, she was a little wide. So if she was a little short late, I would have understood. But for that to be the effort for her, it's a real head scratcher.
It is. It's funny. I did a live stream yesterday, just doing immediate reaction about some of these races, and I mentioned Life Talk. I would argue was the most disappointing effort by a favorite I have seen in 2024. I mean, it just as much as people talk about like Fierceness being this kind of up and down horse, like at least Fierceness finished 3rd in the Holy Bull, right? Like it wasn't, this horse just completely dropped out of a race and finished dead last as the 2-5 favorite. And there really were no excuses. I mean, the layoff was 10 weeks. I mean, it was not a very long layoff. And you're not catching a bad track. You're catching a perfectly fast track. And like you said, you're sitting in kind of a nice tracking trip throughout all of it. And you're supposed to be able to hang a little wide and take a little extra ground because you are that good. Mm-hmm. And you've won going 1 1/8 miles. So the distance shouldn't be an issue. Is it a matter of this horse needs the lead now? I don't know, because this horse came from off the pace to win her maiden back in Saratoga. So she's shown the ability to win from off and pass horses. That Suncoast was just so head scratching. Pletcher now puts the blinkers on. 3-1 for the morning line. I'll be honest, it's hard for me to trust her at all in this spot. And it's funny, last week I loved Where's My Ring in the fantasy, and I was bummed when she scratched out. And now she's up here in the Gazelle, and I'll be honest, I really like her in this spot.
It might be a better spot for her. Than that. Well, let's say this. She wasn't going to beat Torpedo Anna that day.
Whoa, no, she was not going to beat Torpedo Anna. and
right?
She might not even gotten to West Omaha, but yeah, she was certainly not going to beat Torpedo Anna. And, there's not a monster in this race. And
nope.
This is a horse, I mean, because you've seen Kinza up close and personal. And I mentioned this the other day to someone. We talk so much about the suspension of Bob Baffert from Churchill Downs and how it impacts the Kentucky Derby picture. I would argue it has a bigger impact even now on the Kentucky Oaks picture, because in my opinion, Kinza is probably the best filly in the country. And
she would be favored this year. If she were to win on Saturday and take the next step forward, she would be. As of right now, I think it'd be probably her and Tarifa, right? up at
Yeah,
the top.
I think you're absolutely right. And the fact that Where's My Ring has run second to her, it really just speaks to a level of class that I'm not sure anybody else in this field really has. And
And what
we
I
saw a
also
horse
like,
like, yeah,
oh, sorry, not to interrupt, but what I like is that not only has she run second to her, but she actually has a better race when she didn't face her based on speed
yeah,
figures in another
yeah,
spot. And why I point that out is because sometimes you can have a situation like this where Kinza's in the race, whoever runs second is going to have a big figure or a figure that's probably overinflated compared to what they've run just because they're
yep.
chasing a really fast horse around. So sometimes you can see a number like that and you can wonder, oh, okay, that is this horse that good, as the 84 would say. But then you look back and you go, wow, this horse actually has a better race in a strong maiden special weight where she set the pace and just faded late. Ultimate Authority is not a bad horse at all. She, so there are more than just that one figure in the one race behind Kinza that we're basing this off of also.
Absolutely. No, for sure. And she's, shown versatility in that she's passed horses. She has gone to the lead. So she has that tactical speed from the inside rail. You would figure that, actually she seems to, I think, like a little bit more distance. So she's handled 2 turns before. It's all silly things to say for a horse that has yet to win, but she's run so well in second and third in some of these spots and run against really good horses. And, again, this is a horse that ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies as well. So, she's run against the top competition. And I just think this is one who should benefit coming to the East Coast and maybe catching a little bit of an easier field. And, she was 6-1 on the morning line in the fantasy. She's 7-2 on the morning line here. So that should, kind of tell you if Val Brinkerhoff knew where the easier spot was certainly going to be to potentially get this filly qualified for the Kentucky Oaks. I will mention just very quickly, there are a couple of other horses that I think are interesting in this race. One of them is Carmelina for Butch Reed, the number 9 horse.
She's fast.
She's got really good speed. There's not necessarily a load of speed in this race. There's some tactical speed. A lot of horses that like to kind of sit close and track, but there's not necessarily a lot of need to lead horses. And from the far outside, I would imagine that Michael Sanchez is going to go to the front. And this is one who finished second in the Busher to Jody's Pride, who we're going to see run in the Ashland on Friday. And, before that, really traveled everywhere. Won at Laurel, won at Penn National, won at Colonial. I mean, this horse travels everywhere. And, Butch has obviously got a horse we'll talk about a little bit later in Uncle Heavy in the Wood Memorial. But if this horse gets out in front at 6-1, I wouldn't be shocked if this horse could wire the field.
Certainly agree. And what's nice about the DRF Formulator past performances, they have this section on the side where you can make your notes and it'll save your notes for you. So you can get incredible insight like mine from when I was typing last night, sitting at the Claim Jumper bar and I was using my iPad, the fastest ? I looked back at that. It's like, that's some great insight. There. So, if you can see on the right side there in the past performance box, incredible stuff. I think I had like a little trip note somewhere else on one of the horses. I was eating my cheese bread and my loaded fries last night at Claim Jumper. So shout out to them as I saw Ohtani ding one up for the first time for the Dodgers.
Yeah, that's right. He got his first hit.
I wanted to mention this horse at a little bit of a price, Matt. Now the issue is the reason why I'm intrigued by this horse is a price, but with these connections and just one simple glance to the running lines, I'm not sure. I do think she will get bet. So the question is how much, right? If she's 8-1, I'm fine with that. If she's 6-1, I probably don't want to take much less than that. But I go through her career race by race. So in her career debut, she finishes behind a horse named West Sunset, and West Sunset comes back out of that race and wins the stakes race, the Rags to Riches, in her next start by 6 3/4 lengths and earns an 85 Beyer speed figure. A horse named Intricate was also in that race. Intricate was the grade 2 Golden Rod winner. She kind of threw in a clunker in the Fairground Oaks. I was reading, I think they may have found an excuse to why she just didn't really run that well. And
yeah, I saw that.
They may give her another shot back. But point being, she's just a real quality horse. So strong debut race behind a couple of next out stakes winners. Then comes back in her second start. And who does she hook? At Keeneland, going 7 furlongs. Probably the Kentucky Oaks favorite, Tarifa, right now, who is 4 for 5 and now a multiple graded stakes winner. And she just earned a 95 Beyer speed figure, winning the Fairgrounds Oaks last time out. So that's career start number 2, where Regulatory Risk finishes second. No shame there. She comes back in her third start at Aqueduct on a muddy track, and she wins. She breaks her maiden. She beats 2 next out winners. One of them is a horse named Value Area, who since has come back and won 2 of her 3 starts. And she finished third in the Ruthless Stakes here behind nice horses named Alina's Forte and Gallia Princess. Alina's Forte is running on opening day at Keeneland. So, we're talking about some really strong races, Matt, that Regulatory Risk comes out of. And then last time out, the March 2nd race, you watch it back, she's sitting in a really good spot. And then when she was asked, just had nothing, just didn't respond. I actually like that, because she was in the right spot, but she's been off for a couple months, so she may have needed the race. And also, it was on a sloppy racetrack. She just may not have been taking to the track all that much when they asked her to go, when Jody's Pride was able to just, flip to another gear. I think she's very interesting putting 2 starts together, especially if we get a fast track, because her best race came on a fast track, and she has not had one in her last few starts. She may have just won on December 30th by class that day, even not loving an off track. She may have just been better than that field, gotten away with a good trip and beat them. But I think second off the bench, fast track here, Dylan Davis, really, really good, like top tier rider that doesn't get placed with the top tier riders or bet like a lot of the top tier riders.
Yeah, listen, Regulatory Risk is a really nice price and should sit a very nice trip, because if you let Carmelina go to the lead, then Regulatory Risk should be tracking very close behind her. And that's kind of traditionally been the trip you want, going 2 turns here at Aqueduct. Again, since the beginning of the fall meet, 67% of winners going 2 turns on the dirt have been tracking within 3 lengths of the pace at second call. You don't see a lot of gate to wire winners. You don't see a lot of closers. You see a lot of people who track, which is not all that surprising, but given the dirt, that's usually the winning trip on dirt. But yeah, this is one who I think you're absolutely right, could really benefit from a dry track. The question is the price, but I think you'll get no worse than 6 to 1.
Yeah.
I think 6 to 1's a reasonable cutoff point to go. I don't know if I want it any lower than that.
Because you have to ask the question.
Probably get that. Yeah.
They have to be built into the price. The things, it has to be built in with some of the question marks for her. But you mentioned Carmelina, who, if you're playing any kind of pick 4s, pick 5s, I think she's a must use based on the versions of this race where she could just run away and hide.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing we should mention is, and this is something which I don't know how you feel, but this Oaks picture, and maybe I felt the same way about the Derby for a while too, really until the last week or so, I feel like all these fillies were just kind of right around the same spot. Like nobody really had stood up until really Tarifa kind of stood up and asserted herself, and then Torpedo Anna a little bit.
Yeah. And let me say, both of them are very good, but they've just sort of risen to the top of a group that, like, they're the top of the group, but they haven't really separated themselves either. No,
not at all.
So I know I'm exactly where you're going. Like, it still feels like this is a group that's ripe for, like a horse or two to kind of stamp up, or a horse like a Carmelina who's just really fast and she can run away with a race like this. I'm not scared off in a lot of these fillies races, is probably a good way of putting it, from using prices. Nobody terrifies me.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And none of these horses really are that fast. I mean, that's the thing about Life Talk, is you look at Life Talk from a Beyer speed figure standpoint, her best figures at Demoiselle going in 84. Other than that, her figures are in the 70s, for the most part, 60s and 70s. The best number is Where's My Ring? And I think, it's always fair to sometimes question how West Coast horses adjust to running on the East Coast.
Sure.
And, there might be a little bit of aggression from that 89 or 84. And if there is, then all these horses we're talking about, Regulatory Risk and Carmelina,
they're all in play.
They're all in play. Absolutely. And I'll just very quickly mention just one final horse that I don't know if she's a little bit too much of a closer, I think, for me, and I'm not sure she's going to be able to get there. But I'd be hard pressed not to mention a Brad Cox filly, and that's Barbara Tina, 6-1, with Joelle aboard. This is one coming out of Turfway Park, and has finished second now 3 times in a row after breaking her maiden and debut. And I don't know if she's good enough. She kind of sometimes gives herself, I think, a little too much to do, and is a little too far back. But again,
now Joelle will say, "Okay, now I had to get aggressive a couple times earlier today. now I get to drop back and I get to show off a little bit here and come flying late because this one he gets this one right."
Exactly. And I think she's just an interesting horse at 6-1 on the morning line to, at the very least, think about including in your verticals because she's going to make her run. And you're right about Joelle, being aboard. He's going to make his run as well. And this is one who, she's stretching out, trying, 9 furlongs for the first time. It'll be interesting. I mean, Catholic Boy has been an okay sire to this point, so it's not been, a overwhelming first crop necessarily. But I'm always interested in those horses coming out of Turfway with the synthetic to dirt angle because sometimes they perk back up in that first race on the dirt. So she's one just to keep an eye on, maybe at a little bit of a price.
And sometimes those speed figures are a little lower from the synthetic.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean those horses can't come over and play well. So I kind of overall think that way when I'm looking at horses coming out of synthetic races. I am like, okay, I'm not quite as worried that their speed figures, their buyers might be a little bit less, just because sometimes there's just not as fast of races run on the synthetic tracks, and so you're not going to get the speed figures that are quite as fast. Fun race here, the Grade 3 Gazelle, which is in the mix for all these late exotics. This one kicks off your late pick 4. Let's move to the Bayshore, 7 furlongs. Sprint for 3-year-olds. You'll have horses that maybe can't go quite that far as the Wood Memorial or just a cut below. And in this particular race, what's interesting, a horse who has, I think, the second best last out buyer speed figure in here is a horse who's actually coming out of a claiming race last time out. Shady World was in a 35 claimer. And when we were just talking about buyer speed figures in here, the top buyer speed figure in the race, I think, is the 85 from Proprietary Trade. And we actually saw Shady World throw in a 4 last time out. And that, what it did was it made me look twice at this horse, Matt. And then what I did is I kind of dove back in, and you start to go through his whole career. And it was not that weird for me to see that big figure from him because this has been a nice horse. He won his debut. They put him on the turf in his second start. He lost to a horse named No Name Mets, who's a really fast horse. Then in his third start, he absolutely crushes at Delaware. In his fourth start, he's at Monmouth in the Smoke Glacket. He loses to a horse named Bookham Dano. Bookham Dano goes over and almost beats Forever Young, who then goes and wins the UAE Derby. You see what I did here, Matt? I made you think that this horse was basically on the same track with the Forever Young. You see how I did that? You know what I mean? But you do like the 6 degrees, right? 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or what is that separation?
Exactly.
But honestly, when you go through this horse's form, he actually faced some pretty nice horses. Then, even after the Bookham Dano race, he goes at Gulfstream Park. He's in a race with a horse named Hall and Okiro. Okiro won the Animal Kingdom Stakes at Turfway last week. Made a big, wide sweeping move. And then farther down in that race, Full Nelson, since that race, Nelson has won 4 in a row, including the Columbia. So when you start doing a little archaeology with this horse and going through each race, and then, okay, he just had some trouble again. He was in too tough. Every one of his races, he's facing tough company. Drop him down for 35. He airs like he's supposed to when you drop him down to that level, and then he gets claimed and they step him back up. I only mention him in this spot because there aren't any monsters in here. And he really, he is a horse who I'll probably throw in some spots, and he's just kind of fun when you go race by race. Wanted to talk about him a little bit, but from just a, horses to beat in here, Chad Brown with proprietary trade will take a ton of money. That's definitely a major player. And then Maximum Meridius, who's cutting back from the Gotham, dropping. They're just trying to find exactly where he fits. And all of his form really makes sense for him to cut back and get a reduced level here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Maximus Meridius coming off, like you said, a fourth in the Gotham and now shortening up a little bit, and had previously run very well at 6 and 6.5 furlongs. So you figure this race is kind of going to hit him right between the eyes and, sticking to that one turn. He tired late in that Gotham as well. So, and again, we talked about that March 2nd, those March 2nd races multiple times. I mean, for people who don't remember, that was the Gotham day, and that was like some of the worst weather you could have imagined. Like, it wasn't just that the track was sloppy. It was just raining and windy, and sheets of rain were coming down all day.
Sideways. So, it was like what Forrest Gump talked about, right? That sideways rain, that all over the place,
Yeah. So it wasn't great. So it's understandable if a horse backs up a little bit or just didn't like those conditions. And we should mention the horse vastly outran his odds. I mean, he was 25-1 that day and ran fourth. So, I mean,
question for you,
a very good effort.
If any of the three horses that beat him that day were in this race, what would their odds be on Deterministic, Just a Touch, or El Grande O?
I mean, they'd be 1 to 5. I mean, 3 to 5. I mean, they'd be massive favorites. So I get, his favoritism is well deserved in that regard. Obviously, Proprietary Trade is another horse for Chad Brown. Showed a lot better gate speed second time out. Granted, that was over a muddy track. Is switching off Lasix. It's traditionally not been an issue for Chad horses, but it was notable that he made a pretty significant jump up from first to second start. Track conditions did change a little bit there, but certainly showed much better gate speed, which is what you like to see on a speed favoring track that day, but still one for fun in that maiden special weight race, and now running against winners for the first time. A horse that those are two very logical horses. A horse that I'll just make a very quick case for as a little bit of an interesting one to consider is number 2, Classic Joke. This is a horse that's coming up from Tampa and had been previously running in the Mid-Atlantic for Richard Silliman. And, you toss the debut on the turf and ran a Colonial, finished third that day, and then comes back and breaks his maiden at Pimlico and does it in a pretty nice way against a couple of horses, including Inveigled, who Engelvid. I always screw up that horse's name.
Inveigled, who was my pick in the Holy Bull. I picked him in the Holy Bull. Yeah, I liked it. He's a nice horse.
Ran in the Holy Bull and just finished second in a stakes race at Laurel last time out, as well as Regalo, who came back to win an optional claimer in the next race and then ran in the Jerome. So, beat a couple of nice horses that day and then stepped up last time out, goes to the lead and airs them out and wins there and beats a horse, Catalytic, who we just saw finish second, granted by 13.5 lengths, to Fierceness in the Florida Derby. So,
and I have to mention Andrew Champagne in this because he picked the horse second and he had the exacta. So I have to mention it, Andrew. You gave you your shout out there for Catalytic. So he really makes a lot of sense, right? As like his form, and you look at it overall, and I thought he would be a major player, pick 4s, pick 5s, with his speed, with the inside draw, and the fact that he's probably the quickest that's going to get over to the inside. I think I have to use him in a pick 4 or pick 5.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's breaking from that 2-hole. He works out great. I mean, I'm not sure if this horse ever doesn't work a bullet. But I mean, this horse just throws out bullets in the morning. Just did a 5 furlong bullet, 59-3 back on March 21st in preparation for this race. Yeah, horse certainly seems like he's ready to go. Obviously, has traveled before in terms of going to Pimlico, going to Tampa, has managed to win at multiple tracks. 8-1 on the morning line. I agree with you. I think from a horizontal standpoint, he's kind of a must include in those pick sequences, because I wouldn't be shocked if he managed to get up there on the lead, and maybe a horse like Proprietary Trade, maybe the horse just maybe like the mud a little bit, and maybe he has a tougher time going against winners for the first time. But for me, Maximus Meridius looks really good, and if I'm going to pick an alternative, I certainly think Classic Joke. And then you did your job, and Shady World and Forever Young both might make the Kentucky Derby this year. I don't know.
There we go. Right. Absolutely. Hey, not many people have put them in the same conversation, but I did. And you know what? That's why I make the big bucks over here. I will mention one more fun horse. If this is a spread race for you, same sort of thing with Eliminate. Go through this horse's entire career. So he loses twice to Deterministic, and that's Deterministic's 2 wins. So this horse is behind him twice. In both of those races, Deterministic is going to be your favorite in the Wood Memorial. So those 2 races, you're not going to be that hard on him for either one of them. And in the race at Aqueduct, as we mentioned, the conditions that day, you can eliminate it for a lot of horses. It was against Better. This is class relief for Eliminate. So second career start, he loses to Domestic Product. That is the Tampa Bay Derby winner. Start going through each of these horses. Domestic Product's been pretty good overall. He only ran one poor race, and that was on an off track, or his debut, and then on the off track in the Remsen. But his last couple races have been very, very good. And the second start off the bench situation, or the third start off the bench situation now, third start of the form cycle. Speed Runner was also a quality horse here. He comes back and he breaks his maiden. I love horses like this, Matt. You and I have handicapped enough to where you can through all of their races, and they all make sense to me. Seeing what happened in every race, none of them I go, what happened that day, or why didn't this horse show up and run all that well? And he's not as fast as some others early, so he will run second and third and lose in smaller fields to horses that just have more speed than him. But he's kind of interesting in here at 7.
I would
right.
I would agree. And I think he's also another angle, which I've always liked using, which is I like seeing horses that have attracted money historically that now are long shots.
Yep.
And I go, okay, now you're actually getting a fair price on this horse.
An opportunity to play them.
Exactly. This horse was probably overbet and was overbet in several of those races. And, you could say, well, that horse is a money burner, et cetera. Yeah, but I'm not going to use him as a money burner now. I'm going to use him as an 8-1 long shot. And that I always like kind of going back to that angle of like, oh, now you're getting the right price on this horse. And that's when you're, like you said, strike when the iron's hot in that space. Is obviously going to come from off the pace. But if you look at the running lines, this horse can sit. This horse can
doesn't have to be way out of it. Yeah, I don't think that's as you were pointing out, once you go back through this horse and you say, okay, yeah, look at his pedigree. They paid $525,000 for him, huge connections. So you can understand why he's getting bet early and getting overbet. And so horses like this sometimes I think are unfairly judged because of expectations or reputation, or we just want them to be really good right away. And then you look back and go, okay, well, he didn't really run poorly in either of his first 2 races behind nice horses those days. And now this is going to be the first time in his entire career that he's been able to string 3 races together. He's cutting back and dropping in class. We actually have plenty of reasons to believe that at the very least, this could be the best race that this horse has ever run. Is that good enough to beat this group or compete with that? That's a different story. But we can absolutely talk ourselves into this should be the best race on a fast track, third off the bench, cutting back that this guy's ever run.
100%. No, I think that's one of the keys to handicapping. You discussed it just a second ago, is like going through every single line and making sense of it. And sometimes when a horse doesn't make sense or you can't justify it, that's when you move on. But when a horse like this, every line you go, that makes sense, that competition was just better, etc. That's where you find value. And I think a horse like Eliminate absolutely fits that bill and could certainly move forward on a dry track and cutting back in distance against this group.
Let's finish up with the main event. Maddie, we have the Grade 2 Wood Memorial. You were pointing out in the Gazelle, and I was a little surprised that we didn't see more of it this year. That I don't know why more people or more of the connections didn't do what Bill Mott did here, or what we saw with Where's My Ring in there. And the Aqueduct races and the Santa Anita races were coming up a little light, and I'm surprised we didn't see more send horses trying to get points to this race or the Santa Anita Derby, just thinking that, hey, there weren't as many real established contenders over there that were one of the top horses, we might be able to get a slice. I'm glad that a horse like Resilience shows up here. I was just surprised overall that we didn't see a few more say, hey, you know what? Let's take a swing at the Santa Anita Derby. Nisos isn't going to be in that race. So, you know what? Maybe we can run second or third and pick up some points. Because I think a horse that does decide to do that in here, a horse like Resilience, looks a little bit live. Starting point, though, have to talk about Deterministic, who that was so impressive what he did, Matt. Coming off of the long layoff, going longer on a sloppy track, winning that race. It was really, really impressive. And we have just every right to think he'll step forward. He's had a month off now, so it's not some quick turnaround where you're worried about a bounce. He is a serious racehorse, and that was a big effort from him.
It was a very big effort from him. And I honestly, one that I think the connections weren't even necessarily sure that they were going to get out of that race. And, you know, he looked so good. And to, like you said, to come off the bench after only breaking your maiden. And here's something I wanted to mention. When you looked at this year's Derby Trail, so few horses that were last out maiden winners stepping up into this competition have made an imprint. It really has been these horses that have been knocking around since they were 2, early in their 3-year-old year, running in stakes races, running in listed races. These are the ones who end up showing up and winning. The horses like Conquest Warrior or Change of Command or Dymatic or Carbone, these horses that are, you know, have big pedigrees and big price tags that step up against from allowance and a maiden competition, overwhelmingly have disappointed significantly during this Derby season. And Deterministic is kind of the exception to the rule. That horse that had only one career race steps up and wins the Gotham then off the long layoff. So incredibly impressive. I think the question is, you know, can this horse get 2 turns, but certainly has the right running style for it. You know, in terms of just probably tracking right off the pace, gets a great post position in terms of post position 4, considering that its biggest challengers are to the outside. You know, you absolutely do have to start there. 7-5 favorite on the morning line. Like you, Resilience is a very interesting horse to me. You put Johnny Velasquez on any horse, it's going to be interesting to me. And, you know, blinkers are coming on.
Just what we've done. Do the race by race. You know what I mean? With Resilience.
It's incredible. There are few horses that have faced this murderer's row of Locked, drum roll please, who, you know, so Locked is your Breeders' Futurity winner. Drum roll please won the Jerome. Stronghold, who won the Sunland Park Derby. Nash.
Probably the second choice at Santa Anita in the Santa Anita Derby this weekend. I think
exactly right. Then you have Nash, who is going to be one of the top choices in your Pat Day Mile, who's coming off a huge win at Oaklawn. Then Resilience finally breaks his maiden, then goes to the Risen Star, where he finishes 4th behind Sierra Leone, Track Phantom, and Catching Freedom. Are you kidding me? I mean, this horse is run against like the best competition that we have among our 3-year-old crop. He gets blinkers put on. You get the inside rail with Johnny V. You know exactly what Johnny's going to do, which is he's going to go. And especially with El Grande O right next to him, I would imagine he's going to make sure he gets that pocket tripper right outside of El Grande O one way or the other. And he's going to be forward. He's going to put this horse in a great position to win. And at 6-1 on the morning line, he's one that's been working out fantastically for Bill Mott. And I love this move by Mott to move this horse up here and I think potentially steal 100 Kentucky Derby points.
He's progressed on the speed figures in every one of his races. He stepped forward. Even, you know, in the Nash race, when he was 3rd, actually finished in front of the horse named BU, who's been the really highly regarded horse all along and is going to be in the Bluegrass this weekend. BU finally put it all together and earned a 96 by your speed figure. Just up and down, he has faced top level company, and you've really seen the progression in his last 3 starts. On January 1st at Gulfstream, he was the best horse that day. He had to back up a little bit, but he was 2 lengths off. He was in between. He, you know, worked his way back up to 3rd, and then he just easily ran by the top 2 that day, and he put him away. And he stepped up in the Risen Star. He was 4th in a field of 12. The 3 horses in front of him are just better horses. There's no shame in that. Any one of those 3 would be heavily favored in this race. Catching Freedom and Sierra Leone are probably right now Sierra Leone right now is like number one on a lot of people's lists. Fierceness jumped up there last weekend based on what he did in his next round. But based on like the second round of preps, Sierra Leone was the top at that point. Catching Freedom just won one of his races. So, I mean, it's really tough to knock this horse's overall form. And I think he just fits really, really well in here. It's a great spot for him. He's not terrified of anybody in this race. While you respect deterministic, like on speed figures, if Resilience pops up with another 5-point progression and he's just in like the low 90s, that's right there. That's right what he needs to be to hit with this group.
Absolutely. And he's got the inside rail, and I can't emphasize how important that is. And he's done the distance of 9 furlongs, and he tired a little bit late, but you're tiring in the grade 2 Risen Star and
the slop
frankly, running against better horses. Yeah. And I mean, if Sierra Leone, Track Phantom, or Catching Freedom were in this field, they would be overwhelming favorites.
And he's 3 lengths clear of 5th that day too. So he's not far behind that group who's just a little better than him. And he's well clear ahead of everybody else in the field that day.
And we should mention the horse he's well clear of is Honor Marie, who came back to run second in the Louisiana Derby. So, just again, so impressive to see that running line and to see the horses he's run against. We should probably mention a horse like Tuscan Sky for Todd Pletcher, who's certainly if 4-1 second choice in the morning line, coming out of 2 very impressive wins, maiden win that was just kind of, did what he had to do, breezed right by the competition. And then a very small field. Again, you want to talk about another miserable day of racing in terms of weather on the Risen Star undercard, where it was just sloppy sealed track, 3-horse race, and beats Nash, who, of course, like I said, came back to win a stakes race next time out. This horse ran both of his races with Lasix. I do think that's a question mark. A little bit further outside, obviously, breaking from the number 9 hole. Does have good tactical speed. But I mentioned we've not seen a lot of these horses stepping up from allowance and maiden company win in these races. And
like you
this
said,
horse is going to take some money, and I just don't know.
He's beat 7 total horses in the 2 races.
That's a great point.
That he's been in,
Yeah.
So while I will not argue with his talent, it's there. It's so hard to trust him for me at a short price if he's 3-1 in here. And I do think that's what's nice about Resilience is I feel like he will be at the very most the 3rd choice. Like he's not going to be bet more than Tuscan Sky or Deterministic. So I feel like with Resilience, if you like him, you're going to get 9-2 or above. I feel pretty confident.
I know. I would agree.
I'd be surprised if he's shorter than that. Let me mention one other's that just interesting horse. We saw Safety do this last year, right? With a big long shot. Merritt, who, diving into his overall form, he crushes in his debut. Then he's off for a couple months. He shows back up. He finishes 3rd in a race where the top 2 finishers that day were highly regarded horses. Born Noble was supposed to be the next real deal after earning a 93 Beyer speed figure in his debut. And then he came back and Real Macho ran by him. And then I will say, I do think Real Macho has a big effort in there somewhere. He, in that Fountain of Youth race, remember that thing got scratched all the way down to just 5. And the way the race shaped up was not for him. He wants to sit back a little more and make one late run. And then he's in the race with Fierceness when Fierceness just crushes everybody last time out. And so I think there's a race for Real Macho somewhere down the line, maybe like a lesser tier derby, one of those, grade 3 derbies somewhere, or like a strong stakes race somewhere that I think his form will muddy up a little bit. And then he loses to Conquest Warrior. And while people will want to kind of do the same thing, Conquest Warrior came back and he got dusted by Fierceness. Conquest Warrior was very good in that race. And if Conquest Warrior were in this race, he would be probably the 2nd or 3rd choice.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And Safi does have this ability of bringing these horses up here. This is going to be a big Andrew Champagne episode because we got to give a shout out to Andrew.
I know.
For giving out Lord Miles last year in the Wood Memorial. But, this is, a horse at 20-1 on the morning line who's got good tactical speed, has shown the ability to sit just a little bit like he did in debut, and did that 9 furlongs. And yes, it got beat by Conquest Warrior, but at least held on for a second. It showed that the horse can handle 2 turns. Obviously switching off Lasix a little bit, but you could argue the horse's best speed figure came without Lasix. So,
yep.
Does the horse make some sense? Absolutely. And at 20-1 here, and he's a horse that's going to probably float up too from 20-1. So you got to like that price.
Maddie, any final thoughts on the Wood Memorial?
No, I think, the horse that I'm sorry to see that they didn't run that well was number 13, Uncle Heavy, for Butch Reed. It's not that the horse didn't run well, but the horse just really got a terrible post position, being put out in there in the 13 hole. So that was just a really tough spot for them to be in that spot. But that's such a great horse. Did such a great job winning the Withers last time out, just barely getting its nose down over Uncle El Grande O. And now gets put out in that 13 post and just kind of makes it pretty tough for him to overcome this. But really cool horse and still could have a shot to maybe run up, get some Derby points if it finishes, I don't know, third. Maybe that's enough with the win in the Withers to get into the Derby. We'll have to see. But that one, it seems pretty post-compromised.
So, Matt, not only is it a huge racing weekend with Wood Memorial at 5 stakes at Aqueduct, 3 Kentucky Derby preps. We've got an all-stakes pick 5 at Keeneland. We've got 5 stakes at Santa Anita and the Santa Anita Derby. It's WrestleMania on Saturday and Sunday this week, and I'm a huge wrestling fan. I know that you and your family have been involved in wrestling, and a lot of wrestlers that have gone on to WWF and WWE through the years. So I just wanted to pick your brain for a minute before we finish here. When you think of WrestleMania, for you, is there any matches that stick out? Are there any particular shows or any years that you will have a soft spot for or a fond memory of?
Well, I think, I'll always have a really soft spot. I'm a couple of years older than you. And so I remember like WrestleMania 3 is one that I'll always be very fond in my heart of. And that was, of course, in the Pontiac Silverdome. And that was such a big deal for wrestling to become mainstream in the way that it was the biggest indoor crowd ever to see a sporting event. And it was, in the best match, that entire card was Macho Man Randy Savage versus
Steamboat.
Versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And that match, you could argue, changed wrestling in that before that, wrestling was guys would talk each other through matches in the ring, and you would have these long rest periods at times where guys caught their breath, etc. That match was so beautifully choreographed from the beginning, and everything was so precise and exact, and every single move was just popped to the 10th degree. And it was just wrestling in a way that I don't know if people had ever seen before at that level. And it was just so good. And so that's what I always have a very soft spot for. But I think best WrestleMania.
It gives me goosebumps when you talk about it too, because it is one of those ones that I just remember as a kid going and renting, WrestleMania 3, you go to the store and you got the wrestling section of videos and you get it. And the Steamboat, while not necessarily being a great promo guy, he would cut promos he reminded me of Bret Hart in that he just made you believe
100%.
It made you he wasn't going to go out and cut a 25-minute promo like The Rock and go up and down, but you believed what he said. And he's just a little part where he says, "Savage, the seconds, the minutes, the hours, we have reached our moment." It was, I remember it. And Chris Jericho talks about what you were saying. When Jericho was a kid, him and his buddies, they would take turns being different characters in the match, and they would work the whole thing move for move. And one of them would play Macho Man, the other one would play Steamboat, and then they would switch. And they knew the whole thing, boom, boom, and they had it all out. And Savage was one of those like geniuses that was like a madman, but that's how a lot of creative geniuses are, right? He's so much like meticulous about his craft and his art. And for me, he was always, if I were to pick one guy that I thought encompassed everything that it was to be a professional wrestler and could check all the boxes the best, to me, it would be Randy Savage, Macho Man.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you look at a guy who kind of came along a little bit later, who interestingly enough was maybe a bit of a blend of those two, was a guy like Kurt Angle, who was so
Oh yeah, man.
capable from a technical standpoint, the way that Steamboat was, but was also had that kind of extroverted personality to, still do a 10-minute promo, and be able to kind of talk on the mic and
And you
was
know what?
somebody who
He
everybody
didn't
raved.
know he had that. I
Right.
actually, one of the cool moments of my life was last year. I talked with Kurt Angle. I interviewed him. We were doing some work
Oh,
together
that's
on
awesome.
Better Than Vegas, and
Oh, that's
we were
right. I
doing
remember
Wrestle.
this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was basically just like an influencer to help plug a lot of the stuff that I was doing. And
Yeah.
I asked him just about that. Like, hey, you came in, you had all this like serious background, but how did they figure out that you were like goofy and corny and you could sing songs and you were gonna put the hat on? And he
Yeah.
said, I didn't even know I could do that. He said,
Yeah.
one day we just did it and they were laughing at me and I just leaned in on it. And that's just how it went. And it's so amazing. Like he wasn't
Yeah.
even like growing up, people would have said, this guy is like really funny or this or that. He just said, like, I knew that was what I had to do to be the best. And he was so incredible. I'm glad you mentioned Kurt because
Yeah.
he's so good.
Yeah, and I'll just very quickly mention two other matches that always stick out in my mind. One for a very personal reason, and that is the triple tag team match between the Hardy Boys, Christian and Edge, and the Dudley
Oh
Boys,
yeah.
table ladders and chairs match. And I say that because, as you know, because I've talked to you about this before, both Christian and Edge worked for my dad's professional wrestling organization in Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling back in the 1990s. And those guys came and wrestled for us before they were big, and they came back and kind of helped us out after they got big and wrestled on some of our matches as well. They're tremendous guys. They were so nice to us. They were so nice to me. I was just a teenage kid at the time. They didn't have to be, but they always were. And to see them get their moment and to see Edge get so many great moments throughout his career and the comeback as well, it's been that was really special. Just for a personal reason to see those guys perform on that big of a stage. And then the final one I'll mention is I think most people would agree is maybe the greatest WrestleMania match ever, which is the Bret Hart Steve Austin double turn.
Absolutely.
Because doing a double turn is almost impossible. And to turn a good guy bad and a bad guy good in one match, the way they did is, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it
Me
right
too.
now.
Yeah.
Because it's truly
unbelievable.
artistry. It is unbelievable artistry to be able to take 50,000 people on an emotional journey for 25, 30 minutes. And at the end of that, change their perception of two people who have been with an organization for a decade. And to be able to do that is just stunning. And for those guys to just hit every note so perfectly, and for them to both understand the psychology of what needed to go into that match and every single move and how it needed to be executed and the facial reactions and the body reactions that they needed to display in that moment. It's just truly one of the most incredible sporting events that I've ever seen. And I'll go back and rewatch it as much as I can because it really is just a wrestling 101 clinic of like, do you want to understand what good wrestling is? Then watch this.
Bret Hart was my personal number one all-time favorite. Best there is, best there was, best there ever will be. Maddie, yep. I knew you were going to come with some great ones, and I really appreciate you taking the time, like always, to talk about these races with me. And I am so happy to see you doing so well with NYRA bets. And man, it makes me feel good because you're my friend, but you're also someone that I've been so happy to see you do everything the right way, the way you came into racing and wanting, like, you've been so honest with everyone. You've never tried to be like a bad guy or a shady person. You just like, there's nothing associated with you that's ever been negative that I've ever heard of, that I've ever experienced. And you are the type of person who deserves success. So when I see you doing well, I really appreciate it because it makes me believe in the world again when the people like you, when things go well for you, because you deserve it, buddy. So I hope it keeps going for you, man.
I appreciate that. Those are very, very kind words, Gino. And I mean seriously that I would not be here without your assistance, without your mentorship, without everything I've learned from you as well. So I appreciate it. And, our friendship's been something that has been a lot of fun to have over these last couple of years. And, let the folks inside a little bit. I might actually finally meet you this year.
I
out of Del
know.
Mar. So that'll be a lot of fun
Fingers
in the Breeders'
crossed.
Cup.
I know. Same thing with Barry. I've never met either Matt or Barry, and have talked to these guys like hundreds of hours through the years, talking so many different races. So it's hilarious. I can't wait to give you a big hug when I actually see you in person, man.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for everything. Good luck this weekend. It is a huge weekend at Aqueduct with the Wood Memorial. Make sure, folks, when you need anything when you're handicapping the races, you get on over to drf.com. Make sure to give Matt a follow. Matt, we want to follow you at Fail to Menace.
That is correct. Failed to Menace. And you can get all my content on Naira Bets. And it's all free, even if you're not a member of Naira Bets, which of course we hope you are. But if you're not, you can still get all of my content, picks, analysis, track stats, the whole 9 yards, historical trends for opening day at Keeneland we have up right now, analysis of the Ashland, and we got a lot more coming. So a lot of great stuff there on Naira Bets.
And if you need any help with some of the big races this weekend, Barry Spears and I went over the late pick 5 for Keeneland opening day. Barry's also going to help me with the all stakes pick 5 for Keeneland for Saturday. And then I'm going to look at the big races and a lot of stakes throughout the card at Santa Anita for Saturday. So plenty of help out there for the big races for all of you. Good luck. And thanks so much for hanging out with us. As we say goodbye, we say hello to Joey Cleveland with the call to post.